a resilience to a natural brilliant state.
We're all here to move our Black communities forward.
We think our children have to have the best. It's all about discipline.
How are we going to discipline ourselves so that we're able to save, so that we're able to make good financial decisions?
Recognizing that there's a road ahead if you manage the road in front of you.
The decisions that you're going to be making today in your lives where it comes to money will affect you in the future.
Discipline is one of the things that we often learn, sometimes by our environment, or sometimes we're forced to do it, and sometimes we don't learn it at all.
Stores want to get us in and out and get our money, and that's it. It's a game, so you have to be really wise to the game.
Do you know what it costs to run your home on a monthly basis?
Land acknowledgement. As we gather together, we acknowledge the sacred land on which we reside. It has been a site of human activity for 15,000 years. This land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, this gathering place is still the home of many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. We are also mindful of broken covenants and the need to strive to make right with all our relations. Last but certainly not least, we acknowledge the people of African descent who were brought here against their own will or in search of a safe place to live their lives and raise their children. Reconnaissance des terres. En nous rassemblant, nous reconnaissons la terre sacrée sur laquelle nous résidons. C'est un site d'activité humaine depuis 15 000 ans. Cette terre est le territoire des Premières Nations Huron-Wendat et Petun, les Séniques et plus récemment les Mississaugas de la rivière Crédit. Le territoire était sujet de l'alliance de la ceinture Wampum plat avec cuillère, un accord entre la Confédération Iroquois et Confédération des Ojibwe et des nations alliées à partager et à prendre soin pacifiquement pour les ressources autour des Grands Lacs. Aujourd'hui, ce lieu de rassemblement est toujours le foyer de nombreux peuples autochtones de toute l'île de la Tortue et nous sommes reconnaissants d'avoir la possibilité de travailler dans la communauté sur ce territoire. Nous sommes également conscients des alliances brisées et de la nécessité de nous efforcer de guérir toutes nos relations. Dernier point, mais non le moindre, nous remercions les personnes d'ascendance africaine qui ont été amenées ici contre leur volonté ou à la recherche d'un endroit sûr où vivre leur vie et élever leurs enfants.
This webinar provides illustrative information with respect to the subject matter covered and does not represent an official opinion or position of the Black Business and Professional Association. The BBPA makes no representations, warranties, or guarantees as to assume no responsibility for the content or application of the material contained herein, and especially disclaim all liability for any damages arising out of the use or reference to or lines on such material.
Welcome, welcome. Good morning, everyone. Glad to see everyone here on this Saturday morning, wherever you're calling in from, whether from coast to coast. I know we've got our speaker today, Yamila, is joining us from lovely Vancouver. So welcome back for those of you who came to our first webinar last week on Financial Empowerment Workshop Series. And for everyone else, if it's new, great to have you here. Today, we've got our speaker, Yamila Franco. She's an educator, investor, social entrepreneur, focused on advancing financial inclusion and entrepreneurship for the BIPOC community. She's the co-founder of the Afro Hub Market in Vancouver and an advising leader of Female Laboratory of Innovative Knowledge. I've known Yamila for quite a number of years now. She's also a venture partner in my fund. Great to have her here. awesome presenter. For those who don't know me, I'm Brian Duarte. I'm on the board of the BBPA. I'm also the managing partner of a venture fund called Black Tech Capital for Black and underrepresented founders in the clean tech space, being in the energy sector, being advising a lot of startup entrepreneurs, and happy to be here today to listen to what Yamila has to teach us. The focus of the workshop today is on managing your money. Learn personal financial essentials to manage and eliminate debt, sorry about that, mastering budgeting, build wealth, and it talks to you whether you're self-employed or salaried or both. So with that introduction, I'd like to welcome Yamila.
Hi, everyone, and good morning. It is 7 a.m. my time, and like Brian said, today I am connecting from the West Coast. I am really excited. I'm always moving around Canada, so yeah, today I'm in Pacific time. I first want to begin just by acknowledging this morning, I'm actually connecting from the unceded traditional territories here of the Coast Salish peoples, and more specifically, I do a lot of my work from the Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish communities as well. So to me, that's really important, especially when I look at our backgrounds and our shared backgrounds and stories too. I was originally born and raised in the Dominican Republic. So I came from the Caribbean, and my family are also from Haitian descent and also from Dominican and somewhere in their African descent too. How I got introduced to business was I come from a family of business owners, actually. And I think we can agree in our families, a lot of people are just hustlers. We inherently are entrepreneurs. We're always doing something creative and different. But I immigrated to Canada about 10 years ago because I needed a better future, more economic opportunity, something better for my family. And I got a scholarship that actually brought me to UVic in the West Coast. Now, when I was at the university, I got introduced to a person who became my co-founder for my first company here, which was actually a tech company. And throughout years, we worked, actually met Brian because I was raising funds for that first company in the clean tech space. And I got introduced to the BPA because of the Rise Up pitching competition as well too. So a few years ago, competed, we ended up being one of finalists and winners too. So it's been a crazy journey. So I understand if you're in a startup phase and you're a founder, I understand how tough it is to manage your money. Because first of all, where is money even coming from if you're putting everything back into your company? If you're in the growth and maybe more in the scale-up phase, then I know maybe your questions are about how do I invest my money wisely within my company? Now, what I'm going to focus on today is about personal finances and why. Because after I transitioned from my first company, basically, I was really involved in the area of finances and business development already with my first company. And one of the questions that a lot of my friends and founders and people from different projects and groups kept asking me was, what do I do with my money? And the reality is that I didn't really have an answer. You see, I was handling my company's finances and really looking at budgets, being intimidated and all of that, but I hadn't really looked at my personal finances at that time. And that also helped me identify a big opportunity for impact and also for bringing more education and opportunities for, other Black business owners too. And fast forward, ended up starting another firm, transition fully into the financial industry. Now, what I do is I'm a licensed financial professional. I work both US and Canada. I have a really amazing team right now. We follow, more creative business models too. We do a lot of profit sharing, and I love advocating and teaching and working with people through their financial strategies, because I understand that, especially if you don't come from generational wealth, then we're the ones who are building this. But the good thing is that millionaires, for example, most of them are first generation, but the one thing they did know is how to manage their finances. So with that, I'm going to open to our first workshop, but I want to first start with a Mentimeter. So I just wanted to have an idea of what are your questions? What is that level of knowledge that you're coming from when it comes to money, finances? Since today the topic is how do we manage our debts? And I know, especially if you're starting your company, maybe you're putting all your funds there. As a person, typically we live in debts generally. So what are your questions when it comes to debt management and increasing your cash flow? If none of this apply to you, I will really just open up what are your questions about money? Because then as I teach the workshop, I'll be able to, even Brian or myself too, will be able to touch on these things too. So I'm gonna put the link in the chat as well. But I'm just gonna give you a minute. Please just log into menti.com and you have to type in the code that you see in the screen. All the answers will be anonymous. And I'm testing it out to see if it works too. Yeah, so you can log in that link. Mm-hmm. Okay. Where do I start when I feel like I'm drowning in debt? I would like a breakdown on how I should split my personal finances. Good cash flow habits. Here to find out as much as I can. Okay, so this is actually open and this will be open during the workshop. So at the end, I'll come back to this to see if there's extra questions too. But throughout the workshop, please just put your questions in the chat. And so Brian will make sure to catch them so that we answer them as well. So advice and guidelines on investing, how to increase cash flow and decrease debt. Okay, that's awesome because I would say 90% of the workshop today will be answering these questions. What I will ask you to do is please take notes. There's a few things that you can do as well as your own exercises. If you would like a budget sheet afterwards too, let me know. I'll put my information, send me an email or fill out a survey card that I'll put at the end, whichever you choose, or message me on LinkedIn, but I can also share examples as well. So last question, do you believe leveraging your home equity is a viable option to access cash flow? That's a bigger question. I'll get to that at the end. So Brian, don't let me lose that question. So I'm gonna switch. And I just wanna start with a disclaimer. So first, I just wanna be very clear that as a workshop, as a general information session, your situation is different than everybody else that's doing here. And for that, one thing, I never come across trying to say, you should do this or you should not do that. Because the reality is that, if you value, building wealth and building investments and you're a risk taker, well, your strategy will be completely different than somebody who is really more focused on paying back their debt. Now, the strategies, the financial concepts are the same across the board. So what I'm going to be focusing on a lot today is things like habits. So, somebody asked about what are good financial habits, strategy, etc. But the key thing is that this should not be interpreted as accounting, investment, legal, or tax advice. It's also not an offer or a solicitation to sell any security, insurance, or other financial product. The workshop is for educational purposes. Now, I have a national financial literacy campaign. My goal is to educate 30 million families by 2030. So congratulations, you are now part of the families and people we're educating. But, if you have questions, ask them. This is a safe space for that specifically as well. So,
just before we go on there, Yamila, I just want to jump in. As Victoria added in the chat, if you have any questions throughout, put them in the chat. I'm happy to bring those to Yamila's attention. Or also you can raise your hand virtually. We'll ask you to unmute, and then we'll be able to have you come on and ask your question. So those two options are open to you. And just want to put that out there and turn it back to you, Yamila.
Thank you, Ryan. Okay, so welcome to our workshop. Every day we're flooded with information, and I saw this especially during COVID, where everybody became like a finance guru, was giving investment advice, stocks here. I don't know if you heard about what happened with GameStop, and everybody putting money, etc. But the thing is that we need to first question, what are we getting our information from? Is it somebody that has licenses? Do they have industry experience? Do they actually understand the market? But second, are we just blindly following the blind? And that's why I also want to bring attention to this, because as long as we're educated, if we're empowering ourselves with education, we can make informed decisions. And that's the whole purpose. When you think about the traditional financial industry, especially people that have been there for years, you know that traditional industry maybe focuses on one or two things. And unfortunately, they also mostly focus on sales, not on the education piece. So just to summarize, my team is here to look at a whole picture, and our workshops are here really to just educate and empower you to become your own money managers. Now, when it comes to what your questions are about money and what you want to be, I always like to ask you, where would you like to be in 5 years? Some questions we can say, and if you have a piece of paper in front of you, just you might not know the answer, just asking yourselves this question, that's important. You know, what will your net worth be? What will your retirement look like if maybe you're in a position where you're questioning, have I saved enough or should I be considering this? And what is your plan to achieve this goal? You know, the thing about our finances is that goals are so important because they really give us our North Star. They really give us that direction. You know, if your goal is to say, I want to be financially secure or at least financially retire by 45 or by 50, then that's a goal that we can break down. And I notice I say financial retirement, which is different than your traditional retirement. And that's important as well. I just want to bring it to your attention because typically people say, oh, retirement is 65 or 71 or 60. But really, 65 on average is just when retirement benefits start to kick in. You see, what if you were so financially secure and you had your things, you know, at least a clear plan that you could choose to financially retire? You work because you want to, not because you have to. And that's the core thing about education and implementation. Because it's also about applying what we're going to learn. So in today's workshop, Increased Cash Flow Managing Our Debt, what we're going to learn, we're going to discover $100 or more that you didn't know you had. How we're going to do it? Well, remember how you were asking about budgeting? How do you budget? How do you not micromanage? I want to introduce a different way of budgeting, which at least at this stage is let's become aware of where our money is going. So we're going to build a real plan to be debt-free faster, and we're going to look at ways to increase our cash flow. And then we'll be answering questions at the end of the session as well. But again, throughout, just, you know, ask. We know that money isn't the greatest asset, applied knowledge is. So throughout the workshop, I will always remind you or ask you, what is one thing that you can do today or as you move forward so you can start implementing some of these things too. So there's really only two ways to increase your cash flow. You can either spend less or earn more money. Now, it's not really about how much money you make, but how much you keep. You probably heard this, and you probably will also tell me, but Yamila, I feel like I'm working and I'm drowning either way, or I'm living paycheck to paycheck. But I've met people and I've done strategies for people that make well over 6 figures, but are still living paycheck to paycheck. And I've also met people, make strategies that, you know, make the average, which is about $50,000 a year, and they're able to save, you know, $300, $500 a month. And so really, that's why that strategy, even things like taxes, they're so important when looking at this too. One of the first things we were asking, what are some healthy financial habits to have? Budgeting, so being aware where your money is going as well, that's a big one, but pay yourself first. You see, because a lot of people, when we look at how we live in our society, we also got to ask, what are some habits that we've learned from the people around us, or that we've learned just from inherently, you know, where we live? When you think about this, think about student loan debt. It is so easy for students to get into debt, but that's also teaching people to be comfortable with that. Because if you graduate with student loan debt, now it's like, oh, you know, what's your next step? You move into an apartment, maybe you get a loan because you're buying furniture. You buy a house, we get a mortgage. You see, the conversation is never about how do we save so that we can hit that milestone or so that we can afford to do those things. It's about how do you qualify for this debt? How do you improve your credit? And so think about it. We live in a society that teaches us to spend, spend, spend. But this first thing I want to teach you, pay yourself first, is number one, how do you build that path to financial independence? You have to put yourself in that list of things, of bills that you're paying every month. Doesn't it make more sense to pay yourself first than paying your phone bill? Right? Because your phone bill and everything else are not more important than your financial well-being. So what I see that happens is, you know, If we're able to build a habit of setting a portion of our money where we're saving, paying ourselves first for long term, and then we spend what is left after saving, that can build a path to financial independence. And it's about prioritizing as well. But most people, and what we're taught to do, is spending first and then attempting to save what is left after spending. But typically, what this leads to is typically working for the rest of our life because we're always going to be working towards paying the bill. So, again, make your first payment to your family, children, and future, and then spend what is left. A question to ask myself is, have I saved at least 10% of this month's income yet? If not, well, let's find ways to save more and spend less. The question is, where is my money going? A few exercises we can do, very simple on your piece of paper, or if you have a workbook or anything, ask yourself, where have I spent my money today? And you can even look at, your bank statement. One thing I started practicing when I was going through this process myself was that I limited my credit card use to one credit card so that I could easily track it. And then at the end of, not every day, but I did it weekly. And again, that was a habit because on Sundays, I was like, okay, I gotta sit down, I gotta look at this. But I started tracking down. Basically, where was I spending at? And what I realized the first time I did this is that I was spending over $50 a week in coffee, especially, again, something I was taught from university. Because when I was in university, every day it was like, oh, let's study at the library, but let's go to the coffee shop. There's a Starbucks on campus. Now I'm buying pumpkin spice lattes, which are my favorite, but I'm spending over $50 a week. So ask yourself, where's my money going? Where have I spent? Don't criticize yourself during the process. Just acknowledge that, okay, where with my habits and what I'm doing, this is where I'm spending. And the second thing as well is that paying is more convenient than ever because during COVID, we sort of got rid of cash and we were asked to really use our credit cards, or debit cards. But if we can't see it, it's harder to be aware of where our money is going. So if I'm using credit, the question is, am I able to pay it off in full? So another habit that I had to implement myself as I, practice what I preach and when I was working through my finances was if I spent or if I put a lot of monthly expenses, like all my automatic subscriptions and other things, if I put them into my credit card, I needed to make sure that I will transfer money even throughout the month just to pay that off. And did I spend my money wisely? Now, how do you know if you're spending it wisely or not? The first thing is, let's go back to your goals. That's why I said goals are so important. Because if you say, okay, this 1 year, my priority is I need to save this much in my emergency fund. I need to make sure I have my insurance set up. I need to have X amount of money going towards my debt repayment strategy. And I want to buy myself this, or I don't know, I want to take a trip to Mexico or Dominican Republic, and it's going to cost me this much money. If you have your goals and you have a strategy, then you go back to your spending and you can ask yourself, is this actually helping me closer or get closer to my Mexico trip? Or is this helping me save towards my startup fund or, my retirement fund or my insurance, whatever it is, okay? So that's a way of asking yourself and looking at it. So the second piece is that it's important to reevaluate where your money is going every month because without the strategy, without the goal, how do you know if you're moving in your right direction? So check your progress. If you're saving up or paying down, it can help you see new possible ways of saving. You can also have awareness of what are your automatic payments. So this is an example of a personal financial strategy. This is one I personally use when I work with people or even for myself. But if you notice, the core things are your goals, being aware of your concerns, your monthly expenses, right? How much are you going towards your assets? How much are going towards liabilities? And even things like preserving your estate. When was the last time you looked at your wills, your trust, power of attorneys? So those are all things that are important with your finances too. So let's say we do that. And now we ask ourselves, well, let's reevaluate our expenses. Where could I be possibly saving every month? And these are some ideas. Notice that I have the option for you to write things down. Because if you're sitting there, I just want you to read this for a moment. Ask yourself, I'll give you 30 seconds or 15. where are your possible monthly savings? For example, are you paying for premium cable or satellite services or even a landline? And do you use it? You know, how is your home? How is your vehicle? How many times a week are you packing your own lunch? And these are just little things that we can do to help us. So I'll leave you for a moment. Cancel or reduce extras on cell phone data or cell phone. Corporate discounts. If you own a cell phone, why keep the old landline? Cut down online subscriptions, that's a big one. If you've signed up for things like LinkedIn Professional. So again, I would say take a moment if you start now. If not, just write it down so you can look through this yourself and actually go to your bank account. Credit on auto, appliances, household services, business tax deductions. If you're either self-employed, I know when I work with a lot of people that are consultants or self-employed that don't declare their income because they're worried they're going to pay more in taxes, but they don't realize that if you're self-employed, separate from a corporation, yes, you can have business tax deductions too. And if you have a corporation, of course, take advantage of your tax deductions too. Examples might be, if you pay for your cell phone, if you pay for gas to go come back and forth for meetings, if you go out for dinner with a potential client, all of those are business expenses that you can write off. So the other piece is identifying what's our wants versus our needs, because cash flow is a decision. And I will tell you, this was really hard for me to understand. And I also want to acknowledge, if you have children, if you are already in debt, if you are taking care of maybe your parents, grandparents, it is harder to decide what your cash flow is because your family, for example, will take priority or will need a separate fund just for them. But as long as you're aware of where your money is going, and then we can decide, okay, can we cut down expenses through our budgeting? Or maybe we need to increase our cash flow, maybe through business, through self-employment, or through work. So the key question here is, what is the potential cash flow that you can save and apply to your debt? So can you build a habit of saving first and then spending what is left? What is the cost? This is a different way of looking at our savings and spending. Sometimes you can ask, well, how much money could I have if I saved, $200 a month? And we really focus on that. So we make sure we have the extra 200 just to save. We forget to look at where we're currently losing money. So this is me. What is the cost? So me, let's say 5-6 years ago, what is the cost of wasting $6.60 a day? That's my pumpkin spice latte. And that instead could be growing at 10% annually. Any ideas? If you want, you can also comment in the chat. How much money do you think I could have in 10 years? Or 20 or 30? If you want, you can add it to the chat. I'm also gonna go ahead. That's close to $40,000 in 10 years, in 20, and then in 30. Why? Because of compound interest, number one. Number two, what could you do with $408,000 tomorrow? So I bring this up again, and I'm not saying just cut all of your coffee, right? What I started doing instead, and I do this to this day, is now a habit, I do coffee at home, or I actually bought a coffee machine for the office. So I buy my own coffee pots, and I calculate that my coffees are now costing me less than $1 a day, okay? And so regardless of how much money I'm making right now, I'm able to hit my saving goals. It's taken me years, but I still keep those habits because I understand that this is going to help me also reach my financial independence number way faster. When we go back to the reason I do it is because I'm clear on my goals. I know why am I saving. So I say, remember your goals from workshop 1. So I typically have a goal setting workshop, but just ask yourselves, why are you saving? And what can you purchase with $6.60 today? Here's the deal. If the coffee or whatever you're spending in, if it's worth it for you today, and you're clear that, no, I want to enjoy this. This is important for me. Sometimes even for mental health purposes, okay, spend it, but it's your decision. You're not doing it out of impulse. You know what goals you have, you know what is important. So that's a piece of having control. So a question people ask me typically is this an asset? Is this a liability? What is my net worth? So if I were to ask you what is an asset, something that has monetary value. A lot of people know the definition of asset, liabilities, and net worth out of Rich Dad Poor Dad. If you read that, I read it before. That was my first introduction when I was younger. And it really made me think like, oh, it's something that has monetary value or that can bring me money. A liability is a claim, so something that takes money out of my pocket. Net worth, as long as what's bringing me money or brings me value is bigger than what's taking money out. So if we want to win in the financial game, we need to know the rules and the language, because if you go to get a loan, if you go to start a business, even for your business, it will have a value, it will have a valuation, which you can look at even as what's your net worth. But it's everything that you have as assets in your business. What are the liabilities in your business as well? So the rich buy assets, middle class buy liabilities they think are assets. So what do you think? Is a new luxury car, high-end purpose, or tech toy an asset or a liability? What about your new home? Can we reduce our liabilities and cut down the debts? And I want to open this one. Would anybody want to share, what are your thoughts on assets and liabilities, and what about a home? There was a question about investing in real estate. Okay, somebody raised their hand. I don't know if you can unmute yourself, or Brian, if you can unmute them.
Hey, good morning.
Hi.
You'd say, let's say sac passe.
How are you doing?
If I said sac passe, you have to say nambule.
Oh.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, I actually welcome. I'm glad you're here. I say Aquaba. I think with a house, from just being gray beard, it says that if I keep paying expenses and mortgages and all of that stuff, it's my liability.
Mm-hmm.
But that same house, I could turn it into, if I were to rent it out and start to bring income in. And that's the question I ask for everything. Is my phone a liability? Or do I make money from my phone to pay its bills, right? So that's how I look at everything. So that's all I wanted to say to that.
That's awesome. And I need to learn what you told me at the beginning. So I might ask you about it afterwards because I want to be able to answer. So the first thing is, yes, you got it. So really everything can be an asset or a liability. And I'm not going to speak to a specific investment. Any type of investment can be an asset or liability. Even our businesses can be assets or liabilities as well. So a home, for example, comes with a lot of soft costs that we don't realize. So if you buy an apartment, you have to pay strata fees. You might be excited because your apartment value goes up, but then you have to pay income tax, or you have to pay property taxes, capital gains taxes. And so I'll give you a story. One of my clients, she says she was a student and her parents actually gave her a lot of money so she could buy a property when it was in pre-sale, which sounds like a good investment. What ended up happening was that when the property was ready for basically to take on a mortgage, to pay, she filed her taxes and she realized that the value had gone up so much. She owed so much in property taxes. She actually didn't have the cash to pay it. And so her options were either she gets a loan to pay property taxes or she sells the property to pay it off. And she will sell it at a loss because the market was lower. The issue then is she was a student, didn't really have a lot of income, so she also didn't qualify for a loan. So again, it depends how we manage and how we look at those things. You see, a home can work in both ways. A car, hey, can you use a luxury car to bring income? But also understanding that when you drive your car away from the lot, it already loses at least 20% of its value. So things like that for us to be more financially savvy. So when it comes to debt, if you have debt, yes, with commitment and discipline, we can get out of debt. Now, we can make a list and look at everything, all of what we consider assets. We can say, what is the market value of our home? What about mutual funds, stocks? There are just some examples of things that we can own. Segregated funds, what do we have in our checking savings, annuities, life insurance policies, RESP, RDSP? And what about liabilities, our mortgages, car loans, credit cards, etc. So notice that as we do this, we also want to keep track of what's the value, what is our monthly contribution into it as well. Because that also means we're taking cash flow out to cover these things. So is what you're bringing in more than what's going out or vice versa? So I always recommend work with somebody you trust, but we're so emotional about our money. It's the same as for your company, you have a CFO for your company. Typically, you're the one that's tracking everything, but eventually you get to a point where you might ask for advice. It's the same with your finances. If you're really focused in your work, in your profession, etc., I also tell people that if you're losing money because you don't have enough time to really sit down and manage your money, ask these questions, work through this, just work with a professional, work with somebody you trust, and have a personal financial strategy completed for you. Okay. There's different compensation models, I will say, for professionals. It doesn't mean you have to find somebody where you pay out of pocket. There's people that don't charge you for consultations too, if money is an issue. Because if you're trying to get out of debt, so there's a lot of ways that we can navigate the financial industry. So are we creatures of habit? I have a task for you. Please clasp your hands together and ask yourself which thumb is on top. Because for me, it's the left one. If you cross your arms, which arm is on top? Also left one, but I'm left-handed. I don't know if that does anything. And what about your shirts or jackets? Do you start from the bottom or from the top? So if we were to do the opposite, imagine trying to cross your arms in the opposite way. It feels really awkward. The same way, if you try to clasp your hands in the opposite way, it also feels uncomfortable. So really what I'm getting to is that all of these things, even like what do you do when you wake up every morning? Those are all habits that we carry with us. So do you have a spending habit or a saving habit? So a question that we had is, where do we put our money? When we're budgeting, when we're working towards our goals, remember, it always ties back to our goals. And then we can look at how is our financial home built? I love the concept of our financial home because your goals will always fall in one of these things. If you're looking at a goal of building generational wealth, of maybe maximizing investments, of increasing the value of your estate, maybe your goal is around protecting your assets, that falls under this first layer of proper protection. That's protecting or guaranteeing our ability to bring an income, but also protecting your assets so that they can stay within your family, so that you can pass them on from generation to generation. There's different ways of doing that. It's a different workshop, different conversation, but insurance and understanding insurance is an example of how to do this. The next thing we have debt management, right? Maybe your goal is you want to pay off your debt faster, so it will fall under this category. So we look at what strategies we have for that. Emergency fund, of course, maybe you want to save in cash for yourself or your business, and investing, which we already look, your investment can even be a home, but hey, a home can work as an asset or a liability. Investments like what we put inside a TFSA, life insurance, or even investing in your business. So really, this home that we build it over time. It really comes down to our habits as well. But this is where this is the boring part. It's the part that people don't really want to talk about because we always love stories where it kind of feels like it's an overnight success. I won the lottery. I hit the jackpot with this one investment. But what I'm talking about, it really comes to habits and consistency, building wealth, building our strategies. So I'm going to focus on debt management. Let's move from minimizing our expenses to managing our debt. So some examples of common forms of debts that we have might be your mortgage, student loans, credit card debt, car loan. But credit card debt is something that can grow really fast if you leave it unchecked. But it's also something that we can manage better starting now. So what forms our debt are typically common. And just take a moment and ask yourself what things are, what are common in for you in your habits when you look at how you spend your money. And I look at, for example, my cell phone. I remember when I used to, the question will be, do I buy my phone in full? Do I pay in cash? Or do I sign up for monthly payments? And then I get adding things up, and then I charge my phone to my credit card, and then I forget about it. That's an example of how I ranked up my credit card debt. The reality is that the average Canadian has a lot of debt. The overall household debt right now reach over $2.2 trillion. And this is including mortgages. You know, Canadians carry an average credit card debt balance of over $3,000-ish a month after month. What I mean is that on top of what they're already spending and paying, this is debt that they keep carrying forward. The overall average of consumer debt without a mortgage is about $20,700. What I mean is that without including mortgages, this is the amount of money that people generally owe. So aren't we all tired of paying interest to someone else? And that's a big number. Okay, so, but I also bring it up because if you are in a position where you have debt, it's also very common for people around you to have debt because that's also how our society runs. That's why it's easier to buy a home with a mortgage. That's why it's easier to go into university with student loans. There's one concept that sometimes we don't think about, but what is the real cost of debt? There's different ways of looking at this because it's not just the $3,300 that I have in my credit card. The real cost of debt is also, for example, you know, what is it costing me to pay the interest in this debt versus putting this money towards something else? So let's say we have $5,000 in credit card debt. My minimum payment is $200, and typically we get so used and so comfortable with the minimum payment. The APR is 19%. I'll break down what that is. Of the $200, only $78 is paid towards interest, and $122 is actually going towards the $5,000 debt. If you're only paying the minimum, with an example like this one, you would end up paying about $3,000 in interest. And it's going to take about 138 months to pay off. That's almost 11 and a half years to pay my $5,000 in credit card debt. Think about it for a moment. And what is really tough is that because of our habits, again, typically we start with the $5,000 in credit card debt. If you own a property, maybe you then get a line of credit because you have to do like home repairs. Maybe you go to Home Depot and you end up getting the Home Depot credit card. Or you go to Walmart and they offer you the card where they're like, we'll give you $50 back. They give you $50 because this is how much money they're making off your debt. So yes, of course it is convenient for them to get you to get more credit cards and using. So what is it costing you to be in debt? Now let's say that instead we saved $5,000 instead, and we put $70 to $80 a month that you would have put towards interest into an account that grew at an 8% annually. With that $5,000 plus the 78 at an 8% in 30 years, 8% saying average, we'll have about $156,000. Just one example of how the rich get richer and the poor continue to get poorer. So, what are some things that we can do? Of course, live within your means and not increase your debt. Another acknowledgement on my end, it's easier said than done, especially when inflation is going up so much. Especially if your income is not increasing on par with inflation. Because what's naturally happening is that because the cost of living is going up, if you keep spending and buying the same amount of stuff, you probably are spending more month after month after month. So in a normal scenario, we could live within our means, but if you find that it's uncontrollable, keep in mind, there's things like inflation that are just going up quite a lot right now. Understanding how your credit card works. What's your minimum payment? What's your APR? What's that percentage they're charging you? Don't apply for more credit or a higher limit. Typically, people say, oh, I can control myself. But just knowing that you have that money available typically leads us to spending. Many credit card issuers allow you to freeze your card to prevent new purchases in your account as well. But also, let's build the habit again of using cash or debit and work towards paying off your balance. So what if you're in a situation where you're like, well, my debt is pretty big, it's spiraling out of control. Where do I start? Maybe you might need to explore debt counseling services, but also those could actually impact your credit score. Bankruptcy might not be the solution. So let's look at what are some things that we can do on a monthly basis, with how we take care of our money. One example I'm going to teach you is a strategy called debt roll-up or the snowball method. It's a systematic approach. So systematized way of paying more than the minimum. As soon as your first balance is paid off, the freed up payment amount is used to pay down the next debt even faster. So there's two approaches. Which one do we attack first? A lot of people like to pay off the high interest first because it can save you the most money over time. Or smallest balance first. Pay a little more interest, but has the greatest emotional satisfaction. I know that we're emotional beings. I know that if we see success, if we're working towards paying off your debt and you see yourself moving forward, you're going to want to keep doing that. It's like that feeling of fulfillment, like, yes, I'm hitting my goals. And sometimes your debt with the highest interest first takes longer. And so we feel discouraged. So I also want to take into account that emotional side because I don't want you to quit on paying off your debt. So this is an example of a typical debt repayment schedule. This is what it looks like for an average family. You have the credit card from Walmart, but you only bought $150, but you kind of forgot about it, or you never got it in the mail, or you got it, didn't remember what it was. Then you have maybe another credit card that's Home Depot, home improvement in another credit card, your Visa, your MasterCard, the car loan, the bank loan, so the line of credit, and the mortgage. The one thing you want to do is, number one, you want to put your debts or organize them from largest to smallest. And you want to write down what's the interest rate that you're paying into each one of these debts. Typically, when you have multiple debts, you're also paying your minimum monthly payment. Why? Because look at how much this person is paying per month. What percentage of income, if this was you, what percentage of your income would this be? You see, for some people, this payment amount into debt is more than half of their income as well. So what that means is typically we don't have enough cash left afterwards to, say, buy our groceries, pay for daycare, go out, do all the extra things we want. So we keep using the credit cards. That's how debt keeps us in more and more debt. So remember budgeting from before. Remember how we organize all of our expenses. We cancel the gym membership. We cancel LinkedIn Professional or LinkedIn Sales. And now we have $100 we didn't know we had, and we're going to use it to pay our smallest debt first, which is now the credit card. Instead of paying $10 a month and taking 19 months to pay it off, it's going to take me 2 months to pay off this debt. And then when I'm done paying this off, I'm not just going to free up and use $110. I'm going to roll it over and I'm going to use it to pay off my next smallest debt. So instead of putting $25, I'm putting $135. And when I clear that up, what do? I keep rolling it over and over and over again. And I keep using this to pay my next smallest debt. So why do I show this? Well, because it's a more systematized approach. Typically, when we want to pay off our debt, we put some money here, some money there. But we don't realize that we don't know when we're going to be debt free, really. Now, with this example, we've only added $100. It would have taken us 30 years to pay off this debt. How many years do you think is going to take now to pay off the debt? How many more years? 17. So imagine, just with a strategy like this one, we're now debt-free over 10 years faster. This can make the difference between going into your 60s paying debt or being debt-free by 60 or by 50. And think about it, people are buying properties or getting debt way later in their life. People are not necessarily getting homes in their 30s. Now they're pushing to 35 to 40. Are you going to pay for your debt for 30 years? That's why strategy is so important. So in summary, we've only increased our monthly payments by $100. Now it's going to take us 17 years to pay off. Your real debt is only about $600,000. Hey, Michael, I see you raising your hand. You can unmute.
And before Michael, there was a question in the chat. If using a credit card and paying off monthly the best way to improve your credit score?
Okay, so it's how you use it. So the thing about credit is that they look at your total amount of money borrowed and how much you are allowed to borrow. So imagine if your credit cards in total, if you have $10,000 that you can use in your credit card, if you max it out every month, even if you pay it off entirely, it comes off in your credit report as if you're a person who borrows a lot of money. And so imagine if I'm a creditor and I'm looking at different people, my question will be, why is this person always needing to use so much debt? So really what builds up your credit faster, if you're using a credit card, is using, sweet spot 30%, but between 25 to 50% of your available credit and paying that off, okay? So with credit cards, you don't need to pay it off right away. Typically you have a 21-day, call it a grace period, where they don't charge you interest. As long as you pay before that 21-day grace period, it helps build your credit. And as long as you use 25 to 50% of your available credit, that also helps. So that would be a strategy there. And then Michael, I guess you can unmute as well.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And as my good friend Sam Kosa said earlier, it's a pleasure being here and listening to you. Your voice is very soothing. And as I do other work and listen to you, it's really resonating. So I've got to think a question and a comment. So the first one, as I listen, I hear we talk about debt. So philosophically, I know in our environment it may not be possible, but it's probably something we need to explore. Is it that we have to deal with debt in order to do what we have to do? Because I hear this almost an over emphasis on to create wealth and to move forward and so on. Debt seems to be a foundation. So is it a natural state of affairs where debt is the approach? And the second part is, if that is the case in our current environment, and I like to look at things through Black lens, you'll see, as I come on this program, I always talk about a lot of things happen, but it seems to happen to us differently as Black folks. Is the approach to debt, the sources of debt and so on, is there an alternative for us? Because as I listen to all the things that you have just said, last week, a charming lady like yourself was here making a presentation. And I learned, if nothing else, one key thing is that sometimes we do all of these things, but we still are not able to make it. So what is that X factor? So those are just my few comments and questions.
I love your question, Michael, and thank you as well for bringing it up. Honestly, the reason I love it is because, yes, we need to take into account the whole historical context and the fact that if we've been displaced or if you're not coming from generational wealth, it might feel like you have to rely on debt to do this. There's a few things to look at, and I want to touch on everything, but it's a longer conversation too. One, when you look at what we're making in terms of our income, payroll, typically if we're only bringing in money as employees, typical employment income, the average in Canada is about $53,000 a year. So when you approach it from that perspective, it's like, oh, the average people make is 53,000. That is not enough for us to actually even afford or maintain the lifestyle we have today. If you look at things again, as if your job is not increasing your salary as much as inflation is increasing, then you're gonna find yourself having to make ends meet somewhere else, which typically the one way that people are taught to do this is through debt. And so why? Because debt, it's a good business for financial institutions. for anybody who owns and established those institutions, even for the government, debt is a good business. But I have to go back to, I personally don't believe, and this is again my personal opinion, I don't believe that's the only way. I believe we can also work hard and work smart with our money and invest smartly, not like in, I'm going to buy a mutual fund, but say business. Business, diversified streams of income is another way for you to build that wealth in cash so that you don't have to rely on lenders. And if you do borrow, then you borrow so that, but knowing that you can make more money with what you're borrowing and paying that back. So how would I say this? Because I know the question is debt the only option? The only reason I'm focusing so much on debt today is because so many people are taught to rely on debt. But I've met people that just with those habits, with budgeting, even if it takes years, they've been able to save, they've been able to increase their cash flow too. And they bought their homes in full, in cash, without needing a mortgage. I've actually met people who've done that. And through that same process, they've also invested in different businesses to have more streams of income, but also to even put money back in their communities. So, Brian, is there anything you also want to add to this? Because I know the question is, if we're starting from zero, is that the way to go? Personally, I don't believe it is only. I think you can use that and you can leverage it, but we got to be aware of how the system works. And we're really pushed towards getting more and more debt.
No, and I totally agree that, yeah, I remember it was something that I learned, right out going through university, getting the student loan, same thing you said. And I remember my mom saying to me, as soon as I got a job, okay, go get some credit cards, right? So it's something that's taught. And there is, a systematic way of unlearning it. Melissa just posted in the chat about that trauma of money, which is something she taught last week. I know you're also certified as a trauma of money certified professional to deal with that, because there is some historical context to answer some of Michael's questions of why we do things the way we do as Black people, and breaking some of those cycles. But yeah, that's what we're hoping introducing people to with this financial workshop series. We started off with the trauma of money. We're going in what you're talking about, dealing with the debt, finding different ways of dealing with what's existing, because we have to deal with what's there. But yes, if you're starting from zero, Beverly next week is going to start talking about investing for your future. And then Melissa in February 25th is going to talk about alternatives and different ways of investing out there. So there are, debt is not the only way, right? That's the short answer. And there's learning that has to go around it. It's going to take time, and it is breaking those cycles that we're all used to. And especially as the Black community, we too easily get ourselves trapped into. So that's what we're hoping with workshop series, what you're, presenting and teaching us today can help start doing that. And then, and hopefully, passing that on to the younger and younger generations, so they start off on a better foundational footing overall. But even though those of us that are not the younger generation anymore, we can still always learn and improve from there.
I will say, I see that Sankova, you have your hand raised. Just unmute and you can turn on your camera too.
Yeah. And I'm trying to use my radio styles, not trying to speak too long. So while I was listening, I heard, don't make debt use you, you use debt. So the way I use debt is like credit cards. Like, first of all, if you have good credit, you can use balance transfer, no interest for a year, use it to make interest, pay them back within the year. So now you're using debt not using you, and you're not desperate. I don't like desperation. And I like when you said, I personally am having 7 to 10 streams of income to survive in an inflation, grocery, gas situation. So that's how I'm living these days. I'm working on 7 to 10 streams of income, some when I sleep and some, business and stuff like that. So I want to thank you for all what you're sharing today.
Thank you as well. And Brian, I think there's 2 hands or one. I don't see everyone, but if you see.
Yeah, it's Amy. I've asked her to. Yeah, please go ahead and ask your question.
But I don't hear you.
Not hearing that, but there is a question in the chat. What would you say that the X factor? Would you say that the X factor must be business ownership to control our financial destiny?
Mm. Also, Amy, I hear you now, but I was gonna answer this question. So again, this is me answering very general, but this is purely my opinion. As long as you can control your cash flow, you can control your financial destiny. That's a really big one, is if you control your cash flow. So for example, you could have a job that doesn't necessarily give you a fixed income, right? Because there's employment contracts where you could be part of a profit sharing model, you could have ownership of the company you work for, and you can still have all the benefits and comfort of being an employee. So there's nothing wrong with having a job, because you could also go into business, but going into business, a lot of responsibilities, a lot of headache, is a lot of money that you're putting down. So that could also ruin you. So really, more than having a business is having control of your cash flow. And personally, the way I've done it is through business, because it's the only way that I've been able to really duplicate myself, have more time, have a lifestyle, take care of my health, take care of my family, because I wouldn't be able to do it following a traditional pathway. And yeah, Amy or Aime, you can unmute and hear.
Yes, thank you so much.
I
So my question is, my question is, which I think the line of credit is better than the credit card based on the interest rate. Is that correct?
So it works different in that it depends what you use it for, because the credit card has an interest-free period of 21 days, but a line of credit charges you less interest, but it starts daily. And so if you're looking,
daily.
So if you're looking at just having something for short term, like, I just need to pay this, but I'll pay it next week, use your credit card as long as you pay next week, because you won't pay any interest. Whereas in the short term, the line of credit will charge you a bit of interest.
Okay, so that grace period is very important. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. So the standard is 21 days. I always say, look at your contract just in case you sign something that's not the norm.
Yeah, I mean, and that brings up a great point. I mean, it is about understanding all those different vehicles and what they can do. I mean, I coach a lot of people, in businesses and startups, and they're going, well, maybe I should just get a loan, or maybe I should get a line of credit for this, or maybe should I look at raising equity? And it all depends on how you're going to use the money and what you use it for. And you make a great point, Yamila. Make sure you understand what's in the contract. Are you paying right away on that line of credit the minute you take out the money? So that better be used to generate income right away, right? Versus if it's something you put on your credit card, can you pay that off before that grace period is over? So it's really about understanding what those different vehicles and what the different implications are for how you use them.
Yeah. And I want to add to that, because I need to go back to actually even the question, the X factor must be business ownership. I was just reflecting. I'm like, if my parents, and this is again, because this is one of the strategies that we teach, or one of the ways, if my parents had left me with some form of generational wealth that I could manage and that I could properly manage, because financial literacy is important, either through life insurance, for example, or through properties, or through whatever investments, I wouldn't maybe even need to have a business. I could be a philanthropist, right? I could just volunteer my whole life. Maybe I don't need a business. That's why I say cash flow is so important. But what I made sure is the way I set up my finances, no one else after me will live in poverty, when it comes to my children, my children's children, or even my parents, because they're my beneficiaries for everything. And they know that I'm retiring them as well. So, but I'll go back to the presentation. I also received some few messages too, so I'll touch on that. And so the thing about credit cards, this was a question I got, is that it's also compound interest. And a lot of people don't realize that's why your $5,000 debt can go and cost you so much money, because it's literally, when you're stacking books, That's how compound interest works. It's debt stacking, more interest stacking on top of itself. So I think I might have an example coming up as well. So now going back to this, and Brian, I'm not looking at the time right now, but how much time do I have left?
There's 25 minutes left. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'll finish before then, so then we'll have questions for sure. We have enough time. So I gave the example of what if you have an extra $300, extra $1,000, and I want to point out the last line, which is total real debt. That's whatever you sign up for plus the interest you're paying. So now you see, if we have that extra cash flow, if we have the money, of course, then we don't have to pay so much into the interest. What if we could use that interest for something else, like building more wealth in our communities, more generational wealth? So what a difference can an additional 100 can do? So this little square thingy I have there, it actually takes you to a link where it's a debt roll-up calculator. You can use it if you're in your computer, you can use your cell phone to scan it. But also if you need it and you can't access it now, I could email it to you later, or I'll put it in the chat at the end too.
And also this video, this is available on the BBPA's YouTube channel afterwards, so they'll be able to access it that way as well.
Mm-hmm. So rules of credit, true or false? Once a credit line is paid off, is it a good idea to close the account? Well, we don't recommend closing all of your credit lines because they're important to establishing a credit score. A higher credit score may help you receive better lending terms for larger purchases in the future. And if you want to learn more, number one, you don't need to do a hard credit check, okay? A hard check will actually leave a report in your report, but you can do a soft credit check and you can get a free report from Equifax Canada. Just go online, you sign up, they will try to get you to pay to sign up for stuff, but you don't have to pay, okay? If you go to different accounts and different businesses, typically you can get stuff also for free, okay? And I see Victoria as well saying, subscribe to the BPA, yes. You'll get all this information too and keep coming to workshops. Develop good long-term habits, build up your credit, manage your finances with responsibility and discipline. So what will you change to save more money? How will your family feel when you've accomplished your plan to become debt-free? And who are you going to work for every day? Is it your employer, your government, the bank, yourself, and your family? And who do you want to benefit the most from your hard-earned money? So today, there are many opportunities. Just remember to never lose sight of your goals and your reasons why. So how do we increase your cash flow? And we go back to, remember, cash flow is king. And ask nicely for a raise, can work overtime, work a part-time job, start a part-time business. And so this is the core thing. That's why I always go back. Our goals are so important. You know, will you shrink your dream to fit your income or increase your income to fit your dreams? And I want to go back to something we talked about is, Brian, we were talking about how the first session was talking about understanding our relationship with money. Yes, we can aim for more. And the reality, I'm not saying just quit your job and go into business. We have to be responsible how we do transitions like this. If you can manage business, if the mental strength, if you can build it, or if you want to build it, I'm positive that everybody here could have their own business, or everybody here could get a second job if you want that. But that's the thing, my core message with this is know your options and choose from your options what it is that you want and what you need as well. So, okay, so I was looking at the messages and if we had any questions. So in summary, what we've seen today, because we have some time as well, we can then focus more on ways to increase cash flow. And the questions that you have, I'll go back to answering questions that are more specific. But I can find ways to save more money by consistently reevaluating my monthly expenses. I can manage my debt and plan to pay them off faster using the debt roll-up strategy. In addition to saving more and spending less, I can find ways to earn more money. And what else will you learn that will help you increase your cash flow? When you think about it for a moment, and remember, it's knowledge, but also implementing. Now imagine, do you think that if people understood what liabilities were, they would have less debt? Wouldn't living debt-free be a less stressful way to live? A time when you had no debt or payments, and how much simpler your life was. I remember that was me like in middle school, when I was younger. If you could use your income for building financial freedom, how much better will life look and feel with no financial liabilities? And that to me is the most important question, because when you're caught up in this lifestyle of working to pay off your debt, to pay bills, you might feel like there's not really a way moving forward. This is where I go back to the boring stuff. Remember that financial foundation, protection, debt management, emergency fund, investments. Really, that's what we go back to towards building that financial freedom and that security. And everybody can build their foundation regardless of when you start too. Because core thing is, what would it feel like for you? So just a thing, just a comment and in summary, I just want to make a note. I typically leave this at the end of the workshop where I'll actually start sharing. We have other workshops. I just want to highlight the next upcoming workshops that we have from the BBPA, because every Saturday, 10 a.m., there's a topic on financial literacy. So my one ask is, if you can keep attending these workshops, keep participating, keep being part of the community, but remember, work on your budget. Work with a financial professional if that makes sense for you. Work with somebody that you trust. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I work across Canada and travel across Canada and US as well. But the core thing is implementing. If it's one thing, like actually looking at your expenses, for the week or for the month, that is the one habit that you can implement to bring more awareness. Or if it's that roll-up, that is another strategy that you can implement. But I want to pass it off to Brian. I'm going to close really by just sharing a survey with everyone. And I also want to open it up for questions, because those questions and your sharing also teaches everyone that's attending here. So thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Yamila. That's great. And anyone, feel free to put your questions in the chat or raise your hand and we'll get to them. I did want, Amona had a comment she posted in the chat about being also aware of when your credit card rolls up. So if it rolls up, for example, at midnight on the 17th, then avoid unnecessary expenditures prior to that rolled up, because then that comes into the amount that they're charging interest on. So again, it's all back to what you point out, Yamila, understanding what's in your contract when things happen. I really love that debt roll-up thing that you presented, and then the summary at the end, and it showed how much of an impact just $100 made. That extra $100 reduced that debt payout in that example from 30 years to 17 years, whereas going all the way up to 1,000 reduced it from 17 to 11. So, when people think this may be hopeless, I can't do anything, just that $100 had such a huge impact. I think that was a big takeaway from today. Another thing that was probably the biggest thing that I got was how you spend your money is a decision. We act like we're at the mercy of, or we have to do this, we have to do it this way, and we make these unconscious, impulsive decisions. You said, like buying that pumpkin spice latte. Mine was a chai tea latte. And I got introduced to it in Vancouver. It was the first time I ever got introduced to Starbucks. But yeah, so make it a conscious decision. If you enjoy that, if it's part of your mental health, do it, but don't do it out of impulse. Make a conscious decision on how you're spending that money. So I think that was some huge learnings. And I know you wanted me to bring you back to the one question that was in the Menti poll at the beginning about how to leverage the equity in your house. You said not to let you forget about that one. So why don't we start off with that question and then answering that, and then we'll open up the floor for any more.
Okay, I'll share my screen again. Also, I just put my survey in the link. If you could please fill it out. That's how I actually keep track of people that are attending workshops, and you'll get a thank you, and it adds to my 30 by 30 goal. But if you have any specific questions, just add it at the end as well of the survey. So let me go back to the questions here. With the current economic situation, okay. So the reason I wanted to go back this at the end is because through the workshop, you now see that before you even decide this, you do have to go through that personal financial strategy process to know what's your goals, what's the purpose of leveraging. If it's to access cash flow and solely just cash flow, I would say, why do you need more cash flow? Because if the problem is that you're not bringing enough money in to maintain your monthly expenses, then what will happen when basically you use all the money from the equity line of credit? Or when you're leveraging your home, right? Are you going to find something else to leverage? Or what about when you have to pay it back? So will that be an unmanageable expense and then leave you to losing that potential asset that you have? So if the purpose is just to access cash flow because you need more money, then I would say, well, let's look at a more permanent solution to increasing cash flow. But if it is, for example, to invest in something else, the reality is that that will then be considered more of a riskier business or a riskier investment choice. Because if you take money out of your home to put it into a business, but the business doesn't work, especially with how things are with recessions, then what's going to happen to your home? You might lose it. So as long as you're okay with that risk, then yeah, go ahead if that's the goal. Because I've actually met founders that put everything on the line. It's actually a typical practice, I would say, especially for startup founders, because you need money. So it's the only asset that you have. The bank might say, hey, I need this, or I need you to put this on the line. If you're okay taking that risk, then yes. But for me to say, is it viable? Then now you understand why I can't give you a straightforward answer, because gotta go back to the goals, to maybe running some numbers and see why we need that cash flow in the first place.
Awesome, thanks, Yamila. And there was a question from in the chat about if you have a line of credit and credit card debt, with the line of credit balance being higher than the credit card debt, which balance do you tackle first? So that's the first part of the question. And then the second question, is it better to pay more than the minimum payment for both accounts if affordable?
Okay, that's a really good one too. I would honestly you can even answer that yourself, because you can go to a debt repayment calculator and compare what's going to cost you more interest. Just because straight up, just out of my mind, like I can't think of numbers. If the line of credit is just slightly higher than your credit card, then typically I would even transfer debt as well and just move it all debt into my line of credit so that you cover the credit card one, and then you stay just with the line of credit. That's an example of what you can do. Better than pay more than the minimum. Typically that takes longer to pay off both debts than if you were to focus just in clearing one off, like the strategy that we saw today. So I will look at maybe transferring balance and then tackling the smallest at first as well. In this case, because there's such an obvious difference, if they're both close to each other, potentially I'd say the credit card first.
Right, and good point, bringing back to what you had in your workshop there about the debt rollup, where you're listing out debt from the highest to the lowest, and then not to lose sight of, you said, the emotional aspect of that, so if you are able to pay off the smallest one first, then there's emotional, as human beings, it's like, oh, this feels good, I can keep doing this, I can do this again. So, I think that was another key point that you brought up, that emotional wins along the way. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So I'll answer some of the questions here too. What are some good cash flow habits? So of course, budgeting, but budgeting with the purpose of bringing awareness, because budgeting can bring a lot of anxiety. Because my experience first with budget was that I will create a budget and then realize that I could never stick with it. But then when I focused on my habits rather than the budget itself, then I realized like, oh, yes, I can control it. It's just that on a daily basis, I am spending this much money in Starbucks. And so they go hand in hand, that I had to start budgeting to become aware. I had to look at my statements to see where my money was going, just to, again, have that awareness. And then I could work on improving my habits, like reducing the amount that I was spending on coffee, so that that money can go into something else. Because it's not just to limit my enjoyment of life, it's so I can actually enjoy the things that I truly care about. So that's the whole purpose, is just redirecting your funds. The second piece, second one is having goals for retirement, healthcare, education, and more. Because if we don't have goals, well, I have a list of habits. I'll show you that list. If you don't have goals and you're just working without direction, reducing the interest we pay to other people is another habit. Having knowledge or getting knowledge about those things like we saw today in the workshop. There are some examples of habits. And I see the chat. How should we use incorporation to help us with our taxes and reducing expenses? So the thing is, I want to differentiate between incorporation and sole proprietor. Your corporation works as a separate entity. It's like its own person that also files taxes. So the way that your incorporation could help you with taxes is, for example, by paying yourself through dividends rather than paying yourself as an employee, as an example. So we actually pay less taxes typically on dividends than as employment income. And if it makes financial sense, running some of your expenses through your corporation rather than out of your pocket, if they're linked to business. Okay. Now that's on that side. So you have to handle the financials, even a budget separate from your own. If you are self-employed or if you have a sole proprietor or a contractor, you can write off things. So for example, for my business, I have my team and everything, but I still haven't even incorporated because on my personal expenses and on my personal income, I can deduct so many things of my personal life with the type of business I do. Like my trips, I deduct them. Or if I go for dinner, if I go for coffee, now all my coffees are tax deductible. So found a business that fitted the lifestyle I wanted. But, you know, a portion of your rent is in the list, but I typically don't do that. But for people, you know, that have a business, it just needs to make sense for you to have tax deductions. So if you do web design and you only need a computer, but you're constantly traveling, that might not make sense for the CRA. But if you're in a business where maybe you do services or you work with people, it just needs to make sense for you to write it off.
And I mean, to Mona was bringing up a point, you know, there are people that are senior citizens on the call, you know, is there anything that you'd recommend to those that are close to retirement or have retired, you know, things they can do? And I mean, I partly ties back to what you said at the beginning, every situation is different, but is there anything else you could add to that to sort of incorporate what they could do and what they could look at? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so one step is if you're already claiming for CPP, old age security, then something I found with some clients is that they actually are not maximizing their benefits. There's things they could literally just in the application take off and get a few extra $100 here and there. That's one way to look at what they're getting. Second, if they haven't started claiming for those benefits, I would say we really look at from a perspective of where are you withdrawing your money from first, because we could push things like CBP, old age security, etc. We can really push those things to a later date to again get more benefits. But I would say for anybody that's a senior, even more important than for even, I mean, it's important for everyone, but it's sitting down and breaking down not a budget, but what lifestyle we want to have and how much would my budget need to look like for me to have that lifestyle during retirement. Because even when somebody is quote unquote a senior, I've seen seniors also that do things they love, and maybe it can be a business if they need to bring in more cash flow. Or I've seen people as well that just by moving money here and there, again, for example, not withdrawing all of your money from tax deferred sources at the beginning. So don't just withdraw from your pension and from the RSP and from CPP at the same time. If there's anything like that, it's a good example. You know, can we keep your taxes lower by bringing money out first from sources where we don't pay taxes when we withdraw? So the strategies that I will look at that point are like that. And if you are starting to save for retirement, then keep that retirement goal in mind, regardless of what age, if you're 40, if you're 50, 30, if you're in your 20s. So I will give broader responses, but also I want to say, are there any specific questions from any age group? Because the thing about financial habits is that's why I haven't talked about specific products. Financial habits are the same or can apply for everyone, regardless of your age, regardless of where you come from. The anxiety that we feel around money, we feel it at every age too. And guidelines to investing, I think Brian mentioned for next week, we'll have that workshop for investing. Right, Brian? And then also Melissa is going to talk about other ways of investing in the last workshop.
Yeah. So yeah, to start off, investing for your future is the webinar that we're having next week. I know Victoria's going to bring that up here near the end. That's with Beverly Allen. So that's going to be talking investing, what you need to know, understanding the stock market, developing your skills that can help you grow your wealth, and then talking from a perspective either whether you're a novice or whether you're an expert. And then the final webinar on the 25th is alternative investments, introduction to angel investing and venture capital for those that are, in the position to do that. So, it's the secrets, as you said, that the rich know that maybe is not necessarily known with that throughout our broader community. I do see one more question in the chat here. Oh, two. So go ahead, Sankofa.
Yeah, well, one of my things I do, I'm within the school boards, and we recognize that these systems that we experience, these are older than time. So we have our children living in a lot of the neighborhoods, whether it's housing. I work in a program called Model Schools, and we look at the LOI, Learning Operating Index, the social indicators of health, wealth, and all of that jazz. But we don't have, the systems don't really teach financial literacy. So, so even now I'm giving some of these links to some of the high school young people. So they don't need that. The school won't do it. Maybe we can get some of those high school students who wants to do their business to come out on these phone calls. And I just want to ask Yamila, what are we doing for those, and I think from even elementary up, do you do anything for those young people? Workshop geared towards the young as they, we can't do the same for the older folks, or the young folks need to be excited.
Oh, they do. So you'd be surprised. So my team does a lot of outreach. We don't like the way we structure even our money. We barely spend money in marketing because we were rather put it in outreach. We're a social enterprise, but that forms the relationship. So for example, our team has a longstanding relationship with organizations that reach out and that ask us to come, like high schools. I find that typically private schools like to invite us. Universities have invited us. We've gone to charities, to businesses, even to do workshops for staffs as well. But I would love to bring even a whole financial literacy program to the school board, to the school district. I found it a bit challenging to even get buy-in sometimes from the staff. So this is where I put an ask for everyone that's here, that if you have any referrals, any connections for me to be able to do more outreach with my team, I would love that, because we're not going to hit our goal alone. And we also have a program of train the trainer. So we can train people on teaching this workshop, some working with people, etc. And that's part of then our recruitment strategy is train the trainers, so that we're not always the ones that are teaching in different communities, but we can build capacity so people can teach and do this work in their communities too.
Yeah, and I know we're getting near the end here. I just add into that, like I'm off after this to Brampton, where I'm doing an entrepreneurship workshop for grade 11 and 12 students. So, we do try get out there and get that message as much as possible. So there's so much to be done, and we could do what we can do. Michael, if you can ask your question quickly.
Very quickly, actually,
come to the end.
Actually, as we talk about alternate investment, please do some research on the African alternate investment. In the Caribbean, we have the thing we call the partnership. And I think in Trinidad, they call it the SUSO or something like that. Let's not just talk about the ones that we see here in the free market, but in the Black space, they are historical and traditional and ways that work in the past. So as you do the alternative investment, see if you can't speak on it yourself, see if you can get somebody in the space who can speak on it, because there's an alternative out there.
Okay, I will definitely take that away and look into that. So once again, I just want to say thank you to Yamila. Great presentation. Loved everything you had to say there. Love your mission of affecting 30 million people. I think it was over 30 years. So great. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. Please subscribe to the BBPA's YouTube channel, where you can watch this and the other series. Coming up on Wednesday this week, we have Derace doing cybersecurity and privacy. So please attend that if you can at Wednesday at noon. And then next week, Saturday, as I mentioned, Investing for the Future, Investing What You Need to Know with Beverly Allen. I'll be hosting that again 10 o'clock next week, Saturday. Thank you, everyone. Great to see you out here, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Community Spaces, the financial literacy program that speaks and reaches the community. Are we going to be in a better place, or are we going to be still, quote unquote, behind the 8 ball?
Because of the historical disadvantage that our community has, we most times do not have financial role models. Without that, economically and financially speaking, we'll always be at the bottom.
Keep proper books and record, because the data drives the strategy, and the strategy drives the profits.
COVID-19 sort of removed a veil. It's really exposed the structural barriers that our communities face.
These last 2 years, where there's been a heightened emphasis on the well-being of Black people, has influenced the influx of funds and opportunities. The time is now. How long is that window going to be open?
We'll see you next week, and don't forget to tell a friend to join us here on Community Space.